right, here we are. Welcome back to Bookwave, the book club podcast. Back today for a look at Jordan Peterson's Beyond Order 12 More Rules for Life. We're looking at chapters 9 and 10 today, which are: if old memories still upset you, write them down carefully and completely, and plan and work diligently to maintain the romance in your relationship. So I'm your host, Scott, joined today as usual by William,
Hello.
Pat,
Yeah.
and Jason.
I'm stoked to be here.
It is far from uncommon for people to worry, sometimes unbearably, about what lies ahead of them. So my first question for the group is, Jason, what's the origin of conscience?
Oh boy, starting off with the heavy hitting questions, I see.
Of course.
This book actually starts with that question. It asks why, when you do something horrible to another person or a group of people, do you feel that sense of guilty conscience? It keeps you up at night at the darkest hour of like right before dawn. Can't sleep. But in this chapter, we're kind of given three alternatives, three ideas of where that conscience comes from. It could be handed down by like a divine being, God hands that to us, or it comes from within each individual person, like Alexander Solzhenitsyn might argue. I would say, though, that I feel our sense of conscience comes from kind of the history that we all have. We're all born, but we're part of something greater than just this body. So throughout like thousands of years, we've been watching how people behave over time, and I think we've extrapolated the behaviors that we want to propagate, the good behaviors from the bad behaviors, what we might call evil. So I think our sense of conscience is kind of like a hologram in our mind of all of the things till, before written history, where we saw what was going on. We saw how our fellow man treated each other. And I think we've extracted what we call good and evil from that.
That is along the wavelength of kind of my opinion of the whole origin of conscience. What a light, fun discussion to have. So let me weigh in. I think we inherit it and we learn it. And I think that we literally inherit a lot more than conscience. But I think, so I was reading an article today in humanprogress.org, which is a wonderful website. If you haven't heard of it, go to humanprogress.org and digest everything that they have to say, about, a study on rats where the mother was, she was put through stress, and as a result, her child had stress. So it was like before it had even been formed and been exposed to the world, because of the state that its mother was in, it had, these sort of mental and physical detriments coming out of the gate. And I think that when you get into some of the stuff that I don't have the degrees to really weigh in on, but like things like epigenetics and the notion that memories and events and experiences from your ancestors and your lineage have an impact on you. I think those things shape you while you're in the womb, before you're in the womb, after you're out of the womb. And I think cultures that have experienced some serious ancestral issue would attest to that fact, right? Like we have so much that we've been built upon through, evolution. If you decide to believe in evolution, it kind of falls in line that conscience and the interpretation of it is something that needs to be inherently learned at a very rapid rate in order for you to become a productive member of the society that you're involved in.
Pat, didn't you have a quote from this chapter about something about remembering what's happened in our past?
Yeah, he talks about memories too. The quote is, "It is psychologically truism that anything sufficiently threatening or harmful once encountered can never be forgotten if it has never been understood." And that's kind of like the whole discussion that we had on the last Wavecast, which is when we talk about childhood adversity. And it is rather traumatic when a child goes through some kind of you know really horrible event in their lives, or they just remember something that was so vile and so you know kind of obscure, or even worse.
Just new and completely, like, you don't have the tools for it, right? Like if a child sees a dead rabbit on the side of the road, right, for its first time, like, oh, there's, like, whenever I'm hanging out with some of my friends that are parents, they're like, oh, this is the first experience of death. I need to be careful around this subject because they're on a farm and they've got kids.
Right. That's
And
basically the story of the Buddha, like the kid that leaves the palace for the first time and says, "What's wrong with these people? Oh, they're old. What's wrong with those people? Oh, they're sick. That's a dead person. This happens to people? Brain broken."
and the idea of these memories coming back to you as you age uh, is something that some of us do have to try to understand. Really, it's um, that's where where we have to fully understand it. We have to be able to go back to the source, to that core, and try to peel it one layer at a time, much like an onion, and see where exactly did we did we go wrong, and of course go through the notion that it wasn't our fault entirely, because back then we didn't understand it, and we didn't know what the you know whatever rules that was, and just let it go. That's why um, all of us here have had experiences with writing, gratitude journaling, and you know putting everything together from our thoughts and just lay it out, figure out what it means, and then just either make peace with it or just kind of work with it day by day. And I think that's one way we can fully understand ourselves better.
So I think, like, when it comes to the notion of, like, if you haven't made peace with it, you can't forget it. I think the way I would actually break that down would be like more like, so imagine a specific situation. You have a bad breakup, words were said, trauma occurred, the heart is broken, it yearns for the comfort zone of the former relationship, and you've got a friend who gives you the advice, oh, just forget about it, move on. Anything happens that's permanent, and someone outside who's able to be objective says, just forget about it. But it's like, you can't forget about it if you haven't made peace with it. And it's like, I don't think forget's the right word. It's like if you're obsessed and focused and haunted by it, and you can't do gratitude journaling because you cannot even shift your focus, then you need to stare deeper, right, and get to the bottom of it. But
Yeah.
it's
You need
not
to
about
confront the
forgetting.
dragon.
Yeah, but like you don't need to forget about it. You need to be able to have the capacity to make peace with it and not have it steal your focus.
Yeah, I think this is where Nietzsche would come in and say something like, well, there's nothing inherently wrong with your trauma if you can deal with it properly. Like, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's what that whole idea means, that as long as you can take your drama and deal with it and face it and then just keep it with you, but don't let it, bog you down. Like, you have to remember it, because sometimes it just leaves a scar in your brain. So, but at the same time, like, it's not the end all be all. Like, you can definitely work through anything, and if you follow Nietzsche, like, whatever you work through is going to make you better at dealing with that in the future.
Right, like definitely bad things in this world happen, and that doesn't mean if a bad thing happened to you that you're a bad person. It's just a result of living. You're going to get cut up, you're going to get scraped, bruised. It's how you react to it, right? And it's no wonder that bad things happen, because every single one of us has our own idea of what we want for our future. And that's going to, collide with other people's interests, considering there are certain people in this world that are actually have bad intentions. They want to create mayhem. I think one of the case studies in this chapter, at least, Dr. Peterson brings some of his office clinical work out into the book, where he hasn't really described it too much in detail before. But one of his patients felt that all people were inherently good, which is a notion that I agree with, but he felt that evil didn't exist at all. So Dr. Peterson has him read certain things, certain books, and kind of enlighten him, expand his mind a bit.
Well, the problem is, like, all humans are inherently good, but that doesn't mean they can't be driven to extremes, right? Like, what you are inherently does not, like, you're not this immutable structure that is always a piece of steel, right? Like, you aren't inherently good for all time and you're good to go. Like,
there's a reason that we use the word good instead of perfect, right? You can be good, but that doesn't mean you're infallible and you're going to make the right decision every time. Everybody at some point in their life is going to reach, the breaking point. They're going to do some evil at some point in their life.
Is that the problem, Scott? Did you just hit the nail on the head with Jordan Peterson's calling people naive for thinking that all people are inherently good? Because I think he's wrong calling me naive for thinking people are inherently good. And I think you just figured it out. Like, he's conflated good with perfect. Like, good does not mean we'll always do good, we'll always feel good, we'll always be good, we'll always be perfect. That's not what good is. I mean, being inherently good doesn't mean that you don't have experiences that make you come to conclusions that are bad.
Yeah, I think part of it is just like I'm not sure. Like the intent, or like the will in your heart. Like, sometimes people will, like, genuinely malevolently want to do harm to somebody for, evil reasons. And I think people can fall into that mindset. And I think what Jordan Peterson might be saying is that you could fall into either end of that spectrum just as easily. Like, I don't think he's saying that all humans are inherently evil, but he's definitely not saying there's, like, a good starting point either. I think he's making the case that, not the blank slate case, but kind of a neutral morality off the start, and then you just inherit it from, your culture, your parents, your upbringing, your mythology.
Well, and so we return to conscience, right? And I think that's the thing, right? So interpretation equals experience. And by the time you're old enough to get bullied, you've already learned how to react to being bullied, and you've already put a target on your head if you're the one that's getting bullied and is having a hard time with bullying, or you're a bully, or you're not, right? Like, you don't make the decision on day one of school on how you're going to feel when someone says something to you, but you do feel when people say stuff to you, perhaps, or maybe you don't. But that, like, you don't choose that on your character sheet before you walk into the playground. And I think that, conscience being inherently good, or humans being inherently good, isn't a question of, well, there's people they have cultures that are bad. And it's like, well, no, because the culture through their lens is good for them, right? And they've got, like, they're not being bad to themselves. But depending on where you're standing, good can look bad and bad can look good. And if you don't expose yourself to the realities that, like, there's a lot more than just your upbringing and culture and experience and understanding about good. And It's like when you jump into talking about something that's happening in the world that is a source of great trauma and strife and is an active like political issue involving multiple countries and races or something of that nature, right? It's like you don't even know the history behind both parties and what their conscience and what their intentions and what conclusions they've come to, because everybody's been on a journey as a country, as a nation, as a people, as an individual, that for you to make a snap judgment and say, oh, that's bad. It's like, what do you even know what you're saying?
So in this chapter, Jordan points out that when God created man in the story of Genesis, that he said that creation was good because the intent of the creation was good. But I guess it's when man took on the knowledge of good and evil, then all of a sudden things shifted to where now man's intention was to create things for himself in a way. And that kind of became tainted with like greed, delusion about the separateness of mankind. But I was having a conversation with some people, and they said that it's easier to act bad versus good. And I was curious what you guys thought about that.
What do you mean by that?
Well, and that's the thing. Like, so let me just clarify. When I say, you don't even know what you're saying when you're saying something's bad. It's like murder, rape, and theft, bad.
I think I have a Jordan Peterson rule to talk about this from the last book. Do what is meaningful, not what is expedient, because it's always going to be easier to do what's expedient and easier in the moment, and you might see some benefit in it even though it's not exactly meaningful. But
right, like for an example, would it not be easier to knock off a bank to make $50,000 than to go work for a full year? Or to, theoretically kill somebody and just take their money, like.
But then you're involving the. Go ahead, Will.
I don't think it's so. For me, I would say it would be easier to work for a year, right? Because that is the life that I've built for myself. So for me to break that mold now and go rob a bank or to kill someone, that would take a lot of work. But that's not to say that I haven't fought to get to this point. And, maybe in the past, theft and murder could have seemed expedient and accessible because of the context and environments of my existence and other people's existence, right? Like, you do have the ability to change your station in life to some degree, but there's a lot of resistance from the environment that you're raised in, and it takes a lot of support. And then there's the fact that, people that are in environments that are conceivably bad aren't receptive to support from environments that are conceivably good, right? So you've got this toxic perfectionism, this is the way it is, this is the life that I live, this is what I have to do. If I can get this done, then I can get everything straightened out. You've got that absurd focus on what you think is good, right, natural, must be done, that Frodo level of dedication that it doesn't allow support. And that's a big issue, and it's a hard one to tackle.
Yeah, I was just going to tack on like robbing a bank as compared to, working hard. There's a lot more risk factor to that former option. So the more risk averse person would realistically say that, no, I'd rather work and not risk getting thrown in jail for 25 to life,
Yeah, and one of the things that Dr. Peterson's pointing out, at least in the latter half of this rule, is it's our destiny to transform chaos into order. So by working a career, that is generating more order in the universe than it is to go and kill somebody, for example.
Well, I think that there's a duality in all of the things, right? Like the same people that say a bank is order, can be contradicted by a whole other group of people that say, no, this is chaos. This is in fact chaos that you're trying to order, and you've put everything into a box, but it's all a facade, and it's still chaos, and everything's chaos, and I'm an agent of chaos, and as such, I am just at the whims of the universe as you are, and I happen to be robbing the bank. And it's like, that's a lifestyle, selling drugs, robbing banks, murdering people are lifestyles, and they take a lot, and to get good at them requires discipline. And it just comes down to a question of, like, why do you feel that that's the lifestyle that you must live? Because at some point a choice got made for you, and you decided that that choice had been made and you had no way out. And I felt that way for years in a very bad context. And, how do you get out of that? And for me, it was like, well, it was get out of it or die, right? Like,
I think,
and I chose the former.
I think you may have pulled something out of that that's really important. Like, there's a lot of people that would look at the same thing, say capitalism or banks or the stock market, and say, "Oh, that's all chaos. That's all run by gangsters." And you'd have another person right beside them saying, "This is the most orderly thing I could think of. Look how it fits perfectly together." I think the difference there is just proper understanding.
Well, and it's like, if you zoom in close enough to order, you find that it's just like chaos marching in step, right?
Yeah, and you can invert the same thing. Like, the more you look into chaos, it's order. The more you look into order, it's chaos. It's inverted.
Well, one of the things that Jordan focuses on is the story of Genesis, where it says God gives us mankind dominion over the earth, and he points out that dominion is more of a sense of responsibility than like tyranny over it. And what do you guys think about being like a first world country where we have the knowledge and understanding of language? We can speak, we can write, and change other people's mind. But being a first world country, does that carry added responsibility over like a developing country to, kind of have good stewardship over this earth and a responsibility for its creation? Because they say that it's truthful speech, which is the power.
Take my hand, or you'll drown, says the monkey to the fish. I think Alan Watts had to say, right?
Yes. "Kindly let me help you or you'll drown," said the monkey to the fish, placing it safely up a branch.
Of course, you've memorized it all. But that's the thing, like, what you're doing, you might perceive to be helpful, but it might not be received that way. And your good intention can be interpreted as bad. And I think that in first world country like ours, we have a lot of abundance of resources, or at least a mentality that makes us feel that way, and not a lot of structure, because we don't have a lot of people falling into the Christian step, and we don't have a lot of, like, I would say that the way our society is structured is not one that impresses on youth that volunteering and contributing to your community is a necessary pillar to build your life upon. And so we don't have the community or the government or the charitable structure. And I think that we're able to put a lot of people through these cracks, because they're huge cracks. And you can get into a mindset where you can start to guess that conscience doesn't even really come into the picture yet, because when you're stuck at a biological imperative needing to survive and having the priority of self-preservation, you can't ascend to the higher functioning level of a human brain that does interdependence and community and support.
Right. You took it so far away from what Jason said at the beginning. I don't know if what I wanted to say if it's still worth saying.
Sorry?
But Jason, when you mention like God giving dominion over to man, it makes me think of, as a Canadian, of the Dominion of Canada. Like, our country is called the Dominion of Canada because, the English monarchy gave us basically our countryhood. So we were always the dominion. So there's always been like kind of a similar relationship. Like the monarch is this like top of the hierarchy type figure that's just giving its gift. Like, here you go, Canada. You have this little bit of land to call your own. This is your gift. And I think there's a lot to say about like the mindset of looking at the earth as a gift instead of like you said before, that we just have mastery over it, over the land and the animals and everything, and we can just do whatever we want with it. But when you look at it as a gift, like the original meaning of the word dominion, it kind of has a little bit of a different meaning there. Don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Right. Yeah. Well, when we have this land, we have I think this dominion is speaking to the responsibility of sustainable use in a way, because
Right.
we could go out and a company, let's say they're a technology company, and they go and rape the land for all of these rare earth minerals, and they lie about the damages they're doing, so they're not using truthful speech. That would probably be seen as evil in most people's eyes, but in their shareholders' eyes, they're making a profit.
And it's funny that you bring that up, because that was something I wanted to talk about, right? Because that's the thing. Sustainability, I think, is a great concept, right? If you're not paying attention to what you're doing on the land that you're tilling in your life, like, you don't own it. It's not up for debate. Give me 100 years, I will prove you wrong. If you're trying to argue me, you do not own your house, you do not own your business, you do not own your land. You are just a custodian for the time that you are here. And it's like, you go into some businesses, you go into some schools, you go into some neighborhoods, you go into some places, and you see that it's getting worn down, and that requires funds to rehabilitate. And then you go to some places and it's like, oh, people are intentionally breaking stuff. Like, there's this path that I walk on and someone's kicked this bench in, and it's like, that's evil. But why? Because I don't think it intended to be evil. I think it was probably an angry outburst, and the environment was burdened by that human's existence, and that's a bummer. I'm so glad it was that and not someone's face, or hopefully it wasn't someone's face before that, and a bit of both. But
right, when people say, I think that when people say that doing bad or evil is easier than doing good, I think they're talking about that impulsivity side, where it's easy to just let your emotions out and punch something and break a window, but it's harder to take stock of where you are, where you've been, make a decision that's not cynical into the future, and plan out something good versus just smashing and taking.
Right.
Which leads to the question, where does good and evil come from?
Another easy and simple question, just to casually knock off,
I'd like to think it's an instinctive, like, biological imperative of our development as a species.
Yeah, if you look up the term evil in Wikipedia, it's defined by what it is not. So it's defined as the opposite of good. And there's some religious groups like the Baha'i faith that believe that evil doesn't actually exist as a force in and of itself. Like, you have light, which is electromagnetic waves that exist, and they describe darkness in terms of the absence of light. So some groups describe evil as the absence of good.
Yeah, like there's no such thing as cold, just the absence of heat.
Right. But that's,
Yeah.
I don't think that means that evil doesn't, that the absence of good, if that's what you want to use in as a euphemism for good, for evil, doesn't mean that that has consequences. If you do the thing which you know is right, if you do the thing which you know is wrong, there's going to be consequences for that action.
I think I've always disliked the notion that cold doesn't exist and darkness doesn't exist because it's like objectively accurate, but subjectively perceivable. So why are we even dealing like there's cold, right? And that's why we invented 0 or 40
Yeah,
for
it's
you
why we
weirdos.
invented negative numbers to put in contrast. Like, you could just as easily argue that negative numbers aren't real. You can't have negative a bag of apples, so you can't have negative 5 apples, so negative numbers aren't real. But the
And yet
abstraction
I
of it,
could.
the abstraction of it is definitely real.
But the thing is, you could have negative 5 apples, right? Because if I made you owe me 5 apples, you'd be out five
Right.
apples that you don't even have.
Right,
And
but
so,
again, like in the
but we
human
can play
psyche,
with that
yeah,
concept.
you could also argue that debt is just a human abstraction and isn't real because it isn't material or objective. But
Right. And I,
at the
I would
same
say,
time,
like cold or darkness, we've all decided to agree that it is real and that
yeah,
bad is real. And the people that pretend that there's no such thing as evil as their like point is like just rude to people who have been subjected to terrible things, right? It sounds
Hmm.
insulting.
I
Like,
I think it goes back to whether you agree with Plato or Aristotle, because would kind of hold the opinion that like there is light and there is absence of light. But then you look at Aristotle's golden mean and like what he thinks about morality, and he's just like, yeah, you have greed on one hand, but you have avarice on the other hand. So, you know, there's polar opposites, and then the golden mean right in the middle, that's where you find good. So it also kind of aligns with the idea of sin, where it's just like missing the mark and everything else is just kind of a sin if you
what
don't
was
hit the
the
middle.
Indian term that you brought up, Jason, a couple podcasts back that was described? Was it you that brought it up with the wheel and the axle?
The
Right, it was
it
Jason.
was the idea of not the idea of Mara from Buddhism. It was in this book.
Yeah, it was in here. It was in one of the last chapters.
You got
Pat,
me.
do,
It's like
do
on
you
the
know
tip of
what
my
word it
tongue.
is? But it's like if you're the kind of person who puts the axle in a wheel off center, we're gonna have a conversation. Like there's making problems and there's resolving problems. Like there's you can see things as terrible or you can see things as opportunities for you to rise to the occasion and do what you can, accepting the reality. But I think when you get stuck not accepting or refusing to believe that things could happen to you or that you deserve to be treated better and that the world is treating you wrong, like
It's called dukkha. So it
Duca.
means
dukkha.
that the whole of the axle is off center.
So
There, there
here's
was
where I
one.
see this happening though. Like people who are going out and taking photos of garbage and posting them on Facebook and calling humans garbage instead of taking a garbage bag out and picking up garbage with the same amount of time and energy. Like your garbage.
Right. That kind of gets at the intent of, what is your intent of creating that piece of art, the picture? Is it to promote cynicism?
And it's like
Yeah.
I hope to heck you're also picking up the garbage, but why like what is this? Like what are you focusing on? And if you're disturbed by the human race, I suggest you write it down until it makes sense and you can come to peace with it.
There you go.
You are human.
Now you're reminding me of the David Foster Wallace wave, where he talks to all the students and says, you could just spend all your day dwelling on how, the most religious people are driving these stupid giant trucks and just funneling gasoline into the air, or, you could do something about it.
Yeah.
Well, there's
It,
one idea from this chapter where he calls humans cartographers, geographers, sailors, and explorers, because we all have to make a decision in our life of what we want to do in the future. You know, we have our paths. We're here at the present, but we have these formless paths in front of us that we don't know where they take us, but we have to choose one of those paths.
Be a seeker.
Well, and that kind of dovetails right nicely into the next rule, right? What's the title of it, Pat?
Oh,
Plan and work diligently to maintain the romance in your relationship.
Right. So that one, it's like, it's the difference between goals and wishes, right? Like, oh, I wish I could have good intimacy with my wife. And it's like, okay, what's your plan? Well, I plan to have good intimacy with my wife. Well, that's not a plan.
That's not a
That
smart
is
goal.
A wish. If you can't make
Right.
it a smart goal, you don't have a plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Rule 10, he's really talking about, you know, marriage between two people, but he also goes into relationships of people who aren't married. And he asked the question, you know, at the beginning of the chapter, well, when's the last time you've been out on a date? Because that's a skill that you have to practice. And personally, you know, I've been married for 6 years, been with my wife for 17 years, you know, so we lived quite a long time together without being married, just like he recommends you don't. And
I did the same thing 5 years before marriage.
Oh, hey, me too. Look, I'm single now.
1 out of 3. Not bad statistics.
I was dating
But-
7 years ago, and then I decided to work on myself. By work on myself, I mean
man.
become a voice actor and do a podcast with you guys.
That sounded so enthusiastic. What did you do with Patrick?
But that's kind of what dating is, you know, it's being enthusiastic about who you are and what you're interested in, and, you know, sharing that with somebody else.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you do. Like, you could go out to a movie. If you're interested in the movie, you're gonna, that creation, the intent is good, and so the creation will be good.
Well, and
Well,
it's
it's
like,
also
so-
the idea of negotiation, which Jordan talks about frequently, which is, you know, if you are going to date somebody, or if you have been in a relationship with somebody for a long time, or if you've been married, just try to figure out what you want to do together and work your way up the steps to get what you want with that. Whether it be like, you know, if you're married and you want to figure out who's going to do the dishes or who's going to cook or everything like that, or, you know, get the groceries or whatever. It's kind of like that.
So, the thing about dates, the thing about anything really, like the thing about all great human creation is it starts off with this really ugly thing, and then what we do as a human race is we just put more layers on it and more layers on it until it's polished, and you get something like a keyboard with blue WASD keys for the gamers. But it's like underneath that plastic, there's a little rubber thing, and underneath that rubber thing, there's just a positive and a negative, and they connect by a little piece of metal, and they send a 1 or a 0. And if that's all you had, you wouldn't even be using the product. And you can't take that to market. You have to put these layers on. And then so you say, oh, well, we like movies. We're going to go on a date. We're going to go see this movie. And it's like, okay, so who's going to drive? How are you going to get there? Are you going to go as fast as you can? Are you going to take the shortest route? Are you going to roll the windows down? Are you going to take the scenic route? What are you going to do to the car? Are you going to clean the car first? Are you going to freshen the car first? Are you going to get her flowers? Are you going to pick her up? What are you wearing? Did you shower? Like you can break it down into as many layers up until like don't talk during the movie because that would be rude.
Right.
Not
And
that we have cinemas.
doing all of those things, you know, injects meaning into it. And there's something magical that happens in the brain, I think, when two people first start dating. They are sharing those natural endorphins. They feel this, very wholesome, natural high from being together. But after a while, that kind of wears off. So if you don't develop an actual practice, when that does wear off, you're going to be left looking at each other, blinking, thinking, well, who are you? You don't make me feel good anymore. But you got to ask yourself, well, what am I doing to kind of practice the beginner mind, and try to find the magic? Because that person, whoever it is, even if you've been married 30 years, everybody's an unfathomable enigma. You can never really truly know them, right?
No, you may not. But we've
Yeah.
also been fed a terrible lie by Disney, right? And that they lived happily ever after. And so we've got this whole notion that once you've impressed upon the person that you are a worthy, courter, then you stop doing it. And it's like, no. You know how to do this because you did it the first time, but someone didn't teach you that you're supposed to do it every time anything happens in your life. And it's not just with who you're in a relationship with, because it's like you're in a relationship with yourself. And, smells make you feel stuff and you can associate them with events. Sounds make you feel stuff, and there's certain wavelengths that make you do different things, certain rhythms that make your heart feel a certain way. And if you create an environment with feng shui and symbolism and colors that we've learned about for 80 years or so with psychology,
Right.
you can influence the impression that is set, and you can be very intentional about what you're doing and make it easier for you to do the thing that you want to do and for it to be understood.
Yeah.
Use your form of imagination.
But if you abandon the traditional calendar of holidays that come from Christianity, like Valentine's Day and Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, it's like we've got this really easy toolkit that we can lean on February 14th. If we're a single white man in Western America, we can go get some flowers and chocolate and roll the dice, because, right? Like that was the cultural thing up until about a year and a half ago. There's a whole bunch of different times of year that we have tradition and rules that we can just lean into to impress that immediately, and it makes it way easier.
Yeah.
If you abandon all that, what do? You have to create your own holidays, and then you have to teach people about your holidays, and then you're a freak.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't want to be a part of your cult.
Yeah, well, I got April Fools. I got May the 4th.
Yeah. See, that
Yeah.
is me though. Like every solstice, April Fools, pretty much the whole month of April is New Year's. May the 4th.
Of course, May the
Canada
4th
Day.
is the biggest one. Oh yeah, Canada Day.
And every statutory holiday, I get an extra day on my weekend.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth also talking about like the relationship thing. About like I've been watching the Vervaeke, the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. The last one I watched was on romanticism. And he touched on something that I felt pretty strongly about since, my relationship ended, to be frank. But it's like, there's a lot of people out there that think once you get into a romantic relationship, you find a girl, you marry her, you settle down, then it's all game over. And then you put all the pressure on your romantic partner to supply all of that meaning for you. And that's a lot of pressure, and that's incredibly unsustainable. And earlier today, in fact, I was called a self-centered asshole. I'm like, you know what? I don't even take that as an insult, because for a long time I was centered around somebody else, and I completely lost my individuality. So if I can be a little bit more self-centered, then maybe it's necessary.
Right. It's incredibly hard too if you don't tell the other person what your desires are. If you just leave them to guess and then punish them for the guessing wrong, that's just tragic.
Yeah, and what is there to be in love with in the other person if your entire identity is I revolve around this person and their identity is I revolve around this person? That's that toxic codependency we always talk about, you know?
Right.
Well, and
Like,
the other thing too is like there was this notion, at least for me, that love and finding the one, like at a young, stupid age, was this feeling that you could be totally accepted. And to me, that translated as dropping your baggage. And I saw that in a lot of other people as well. I don't think I was very unique in that, where once you got over that honeymoon period in your relationship, which was the thing everybody talked about at a very stupid and young age, the honeymoon period ends, the baggage gets dropped, you start to put on weight, you stop caring and dressing up. And it's like, that's not accepting, that's putting up with and tolerating. And that's not like, you're not each other's therapist. You're not each other's accountability partners. You're not each other's hobby group. And anybody who thinks that their partner is their everything and they're super lucky to be able to have a best friend and a life partner and a lover and a business partner and all of these things, like, you're heading towards destruction. That is not interdependence. You need a friend group. You need to go out and do things on your own, and they need a friend group, and you need to be not in the vacuum of your relationship, because that's not a relationship. That's just like non-existence together.
Right. And one of the
Yeah.
bigger questions in this chapter is, how do you find that mystery in a person over the long run? Because that honeymoon period you're talking about is kind of correlated with the period when the endorphins start wearing off, or you develop a tolerance to those endorphins.
And it could have just as easily been interpreted as a traumatizing experience if we had the wrong set of tools, right? Because it's just a new experience and a learned response. And when you get familiar with the experience, you can start to actually come to some conclusions about how you feel about it. But there are individuals who maintain that high. And I think that takes a lot of willful ignorance.
yeah, I think it's also worth thinking about, like, if you have, like, a set of friends and the only thing that was keeping you and your friendships together was, this rush of endorphins, it would never last. So, like, when that, like, first honeymoon phase wears off, you're, more or less you're living with someone that you don't have that original connection with, but there's obviously ways of, growing that bond, because if there wasn't, you wouldn't have any friends that you weren't sexually attracted to, right?
Well, and that's the thing, right? There's usually a crutch. I have a couple friends where it's like, if I stop playing League of Legends, I'm not friends with them. Like, and so video game addiction throughout my developmental years was a huge one. It was, and it wasn't. Well, no, it was video game addiction. Let's be honest. It was bad. If it was
Yes.
uninhibited, it was a bad time.
I agree with that.
But I didn't know that, right? Nobody told me that, obsessing over video games and playing them with your friends and being able to save up your allowance to get video games and to play video games your whole time as you're growing up was a bad thing. No one taught me that. And I maintained 3 or 4 really great friendships from that because we decided to become men. And thank goodness it took me up until like 5 minutes ago to get on the train, but I made it.
Right. Well, I mean, the sexual aspect, you're definitely going to get endorphins from, having intimate sex with somebody, but you can also get those same endorphins from engaging in other recreational activities, whether it be like rock climbing or going out and enjoying nature together, which are sustainable. Sex, you can do that for a long period of a marriage, but you gotta spice things up, because after a while, it can become like it feel like a chore or something. So you do have to kind of spice it up.
Well, it's like, if that's the only thing that you're good at, you're gonna run into a problem, because it's the same thing as having just a partner who's everything for you. It's like, okay, well, you better have a lot of things to do, because you're going to need a lot of variety to not get sick of each other real quick. And you're going to have to like do charity work and go to other countries and do lots and lots of amazing stuff. But oh, man, you do it with more than just your wife.
Yeah, but just put that in contrast with your other like friendships as well. Like you don't put it in the same language as, oh, you gotta spice things up in the bedroom, but you know, like I have lots of friends who I've bonded with over, you know, just music or just League of Legends, who like I talk to nearly every day these days, and it's like we don't talk about music and League of Legends every day. We're just, you know, what's on your mind? What have you been doing lately? And like we all pick up new like tools and adventures and games to play in this game theory of life.
I think, like, I don't have as deep and profound and life-changing conversations on the regular with my friend group. Like with you guys, you know, like we literally started the podcast. We're like, so where do you think conscience comes from? If I tried to ask one of my friends that, they would literally just tell me to screw off.
What if you asked your wife that?
Yeah, like same
Right.
thing. It's like this is the context. This is where I get to ask those questions. And the questions should be asked and they should be discussed. And you need to have multiple different social constructs and structures in your life to be able to flesh out your brain. Because it's like if you do one thing and you talk to one person and you have one evening routine and one weekend routine,
Yeah.
like you're
I
gonna
think
find
the
the shadow
term
in
that
your
you
60s.
used, Scott, was codependent, which you know it's a dangerous situation. But Pat, you brought up the idea of negotiation earlier, and in this chapter, Jordan points out that there's like three basic types of relationships.
Right.
There's
There's three modes of being in a relationship, is how he puts it. Like the tyrant, the slave, and the negotiator. And those are the only three positions you can occupy.
And it's
yeah,
like if
and
you're
that
not willing to define like how many times you want to have sex in a month, like the months are going by and one or both of you are not satisfied. So if you're not willing to actually hash out your goals, you're not trying. And you need to make a judgment call as to whether or not you're willing to be committed to someone who's not willing to try. Or
Yeah.
whether or not you're willing to be with yourself, not trying. Like if you're not even trying to write down your goals and figure out how many hours are involved and what needs to happen to get to it and to have a happy resolution.
Yeah. There should have been a
Doesn't
note.
spark joy.
There should have been a note on this chapter that said, "See the last chapter about keeping things in the fog." Because you know, if you're literally afraid to have that conversation of, you know, I'd really like to have at least twice a week where we have, you know, intimate relations, but like if you're afraid of that conversation, then what else are you afraid of? Like there's some kind of slave mentality going on
And
there.
it's like maybe you're the type of person who's like, oh, I'm not really worried about it. And it's like, well, I hear you saying the word worried, which means I can just forget everything else that happened and know that you're repressing worry. And maybe you're not worried about it right now. Maybe you'll die before you ever do worry about it. But the chances are you're going to worry about it at some point. The later, the bigger, ooh.
And that leads to another question. What is worth living for in this relationship?
Yes, that's Patrick's little line, right? You've been doing that with your list. Like, is this even worth having in my life? Is this sparking joy?
Right.
right. I think
I think that's one question we all have to try to answer when we're in a relationship with, especially with our partner. They have to try and figure that out as well.
I like what Jason said a few weeks ago, and I like the way Jordan Peterson's been proposing suggestions of like higher level interaction. So I'm going to combine the two because it's like you could consider adding motion and color into these events in your life. right?
Right. I think that the question was, how do you add the sense of motion and color into your day? But a lot of people in the relationship spectrum, if they're having trouble with the sexual aspect, they just go find somebody else. I mean, that's the easy answer, right? They go have an affair. They let their impulses guide them and forget about the commitments they made with the person, their wife.
And I think the other thing too is, in order to have more spark in your relationship, is to use your imagination, I think. And by imagination, I mean present a part of yourself to your partner that has been in the back of your mind, but you weren't even entirely sure how to present it to them. So, like, for example, if you want to have, dinner one night, but the two of you cannot go out because it's, traffic and whatnot, you can try and plan a little dinner date at home, like, say, have it out in the backyard with some lights and some, torches and everything like that, all decorated in the backyard, and then present the main dish or something like that.
Yeah.
That's just one example.
Yeah, make
Although
a rich.
I think some people might have trouble with that if they're not high in openness. That one personality trait. That could be me, but
One of the things I wish Jordan had talked about in this chapter is like the 5 love languages.
Did he?
I don't think he did. The
I've
main
got that
idea
book.
is a relationship is negotiation over the long run. And in order to have that negotiation with somebody, you have to trust them. So that aspect's vital. But knowing what love language you are is really important, and communicating that with your partners vitally important for the relationship. For example, when's the last time you left a note to your significant other that just said, I love them, I love you. Hey, it's a beautiful morning. Let's have breakfast. Leave that on the fridge or on the bathroom mirror.
Can I just flesh this out for the kids at home? I don't know if everybody on the world knows what the 5 love languages are, but there's quality time, touch, acts of service, gifts, and words of affirmation. Those 5 again. No. So the thing about the 5 love languages, and it was developed by this marriage counselor who, after decades of marriage counseling, gleaned these insights that there's essentially 5 core love languages. And the problem is, you have a primary love language, and so you do it to others. And others have a primary love language, and they do it to you, and you're talking the wrong language. And so if you don't even know this, like, you're already screwed. But if you do know this, then you need to ask what theirs are, or glean for yourself what those theirs are, and have the conversation. Like, it's to the point where my wife can just walk up to me and touch me in the forehead, and I'll just cripple into a ball of comfort and calm, because my primary love language is touch. And so for my wife to know that that's my primary love language, and to willingly perform an act in my primary love language, is already hitting check boxes before we even get to the action, right? Because it's incredible. Like, I had so many experiences, where you know that the person doing it knows that it's going to get the good reaction. It makes it even better.
is there a quiz for that online?
There's a book.
Are we going to review it for our podcast, William?
I bet there's a survey. There's always a survey. We should probably, because there's actually a few versions of it. I wouldn't mind if we all got the 5 love languages for men, because I'd love to read that one instead of the one that I'm currently reading. But it's all essentially the same concept. And we should track down a survey, because you need it. It's just like one of these psychotechnologies where it's like, wait, what? I didn't know this my whole life? They didn't teach this in kindergarten? Like, there are people that don't like hugs because it's not their primary love language. And in fact, it might be their polar opposite love language. And in fact, doing touch to those people will make them feel hated.
Right.
You know, as much as this chapter was about like maintaining a relationship with another person, I kind of felt that Jordan was also metaphorically talking about the maintaining a relationship with the church or with Christ, because he's kind of started to focus on religious aspects in this book quite a bit.
It's a very, like I was saying, right? Like, I'm not yay or nay on the whole Christian thing here. I'm agnostic, but there is an objective truth that when you have a system of structure, it's very easy to lean onto it and get the things that it does. Because A equals A. And if you pray to God for forgiveness, you're literally giving yourself permission to be forgiven. Unless you're praying to God for forgiveness, going into it knowing that you'll never be forgiven because you're such a terrible human being that's not worthy of forgiveness. In which case, you should face that problem and write it down until you can come to peace with it, because that's not true.
So I do really like this idea of John Allegro and the mushroom and the cross, and how possibly Christ is represented as illumination, but not from the Son of God, but actually this psychedelic mushroom.
And that's the thing. And Scott and I were talking about it a little bit, right? Like, you can actually break down the 3 core types of Greek love into drugs.
Right.
Agape equals mushrooms or acid.
Yeah.
Eros equals MDMA. And philia equals marijuana.
Yes.
That is just, it's that easy. And if you don't know, now you know how to know. Not that I would encourage any illegal activities or the engagement in narcotic substances, and in fact, engage with. Don't do that.
But you are sailors and explorers. The only other thing I had for this chapter was the topic of expectations, and how I had made like a little note in my margins that, you know, like for the sexual aspect, pornography can ruin your expectations of what, you know, sex is going to be like.
I just want to add one final appendix. I think alcohol might be like, so let's pretend you've got agape, eros, philia, and then just complete rock bottom. So alcohol kind of does this to you until you get to here. Just breaks the speedometer. It has no idea what's going on. It cannot feel the room.
Dude, you just broke my brain, because, you know, what if back in the day, what if the Bible was actually based off of psychedelics, and then the Dark Ages were when alcohol became the drug of choice for everyone, and that is literally what caused the confusion between the loves. That's why we only have one word for it anymore.
I don't know. Maybe.
I have to
I think
meditate.
because, like,
The war on drugs took love away from us in the form of agape, philia, and eros.
you might be right. You might be onto something. I can't wait to see your TED Talk.
But like, when we were talking about, when Jason brought up Jesus as the mushroom, it made me think of my theory of, you know, maybe Socrates was a mushroom too. But I that's what my book is going to be about. The sacred mushroom in the Stoa. How about that?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. Is there any other sort of big aspects of these 2 chapters? I don't think so.
I pretty much gone through every note that I have.
Yeah, basically the only other note that we didn't touch on was, I wish I had read this one about 10 years ago when, you know, I was still single and able to put together a relationship worth, you know, keeping.
Oh
But
man.
chapter
You know,
10
we live and learn. We live and learn.
Sorry, chapter 10, something I want my wife to read and see what her response to that is, because typically she does not like Jordan Peterson.
Oh,
but
no.
she hasn't listened to all of the maps of meaning, and really listened to him in context in the long form. So I think if she read this, she would appreciate him a bit more.
Yeah, maybe, or it could have the opposite response where it's like if, someone asking us to read Karl Marx. No, I'm not going to read some angry old commie.
Yeah, like it's hard to like the thing about, traditional gender roles and this sort of stereotype of the man that doesn't share his feelings and doesn't communicate with his wife is that like your wife doesn't want to hear a lot of what you have to say and doesn't give a shit about a lot of what you have to read. Like,
Which is why you should join a book club.
and it's really
Exactly.
upsetting when you like something and you're like, hey, you should check this out. And they're like, I do not give a fuck.
Yeah, it's good to have like lots of different kinds of friends. Like I have one friend who's an artist that's really into anime, and like all of my other friends make fun of us for being, weeaboos and everything, but like we all share these little bits of common ground with each other.
Well, it's like that quote from the Odyssey about what better thing to do than to eat when it's the hour of eating. It's like do that for everything. Like if you are really passionate about X, find someone who's really passionate about X and Y and Z and A and B and C and segment it off. Because if you go into a conversation that you're enthusiastic about with someone who's not enthusiastic about it, it's like you're wasting your energy.
Yeah.
You want to be able to spiral and bounce off each other and fill your conversation with color and motion. And with that being said,
Yeah, that was a good conversation, guys. If you're anybody listening, if you're new around here, you should check us out at our website. You should join our Discord, bookwave.club, and our Discord is in the description down below, the Guests of Bookwave Discord server. We're on Anchor, we're on Spotify and Anchor and Google Cast, YouTube, all the good stuff. And until next time, may the force be with you.
we're equal to mass times acceleration.
Life is only a dream, and we're the imagination of ourselves.
Hey, Jason.
Pat, any parting words from Pat?
Let's hear it.
Like this video. Leave a heart.
Leave a heart. Don't get me wrong, though, right? Like, there is some interplay between the books you read and the books your wife reads. Sometimes you both like a thing. It's like, hopefully, that intersection is the center point of two giant, expanding, volumetrically huge opposite things. You don't want to be dating someone that likes everything you read.
Yeah.